literature of social observation. Social observation. Now what this means is you sit and look at people. Some of us, for example, love to do this. I had a student once that said, love to go to the mall, but I don't shop. I just like to sit at the fountain at the mall at the center, and I just like to watch all the people who show up. I once had a student that said, I went on a trip to Europe, and I had to go through airports. And I sat at LAX, or I sat at Dulles in New York, in Washington, or LaGuardia in New York, and I just watched people, all of the strange people, the way they dress, the way they talk, the things they do. That's what we mean by social observation. Chaucer, of course, is great at this. Let's take a look at what our textbook has to say about this. Chaucer was just one author in a long tradition of British writers who detailed ironic observations of social types. 4 centuries later, for instance, 18th century writers such as Joseph Addison, a writer we'll deal with later, held up a mirror to middle-class society describing the typical characters of the day and their follies, the silly things that they do. The tradition of social commentary bloomed with the invention of the novel. I would write that down. If Chaucer in many ways invents the idea of this kind of storytelling, the novel is the ultimate end product of this. Of course, we know of movies today as well as a kind of extension of that, don't we? You can't think of a good movie that you love without thinking of powerful characters, right? And a really good conflict and storyline. You got to have those two things, right, for there to be much of a film. Let's keep reading. A novel, a form built around keen observations of character and society. Yet the novel emphasized the individual in a way that earlier literature often did not. The characters of 19th century novelist Charles Dickens, for instance, take on their social roles with extravagant individual style. In a sense, though, Dickens was only following Chaucer. In pilgrims such as the wife of Bath, the skipper, and the host, you can already detect a spark of vital individuality deeper than any social role. And then the question here for you is to identify 3 ways in which the wife of Bath both fits and defies the stereotype of a woman of her time. When we talk about the wife of Bath later, we'll easily be able to answer that question. Let's turn now to this host. He's a fun cat. We'll kind of pay attention to him. The host, 767 on page 116. Our host gave us great welcome. Everyone was given a place and supper was begun. He served the finest victuals you could think. The wine was strong and we were glad to drink. Note the irony of it. We're going to get drunk before we go on holy pilgrimage. A very striking man, our host withal, and fit to be a marshal in a hall. His eyes were bright, his girth a little wide. He's a pretty good-sized guy. There is no finer Burgess in Cheapside, bold in his speech, yet wise and full of tact. There was no manly attribute he lacked. What's more, he was a merry-hearted man. He's a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. After our meal, he jokingly began to talk of sport, and among other things, he said as follows. Now, sport here, we should point out for our notes, and many readers of this have pointed out, this is the stereotypic bar owner. The stereotypic bar owner. In other words, the guy who owns the bar, works behind the bar, the bartender, we might say, who is fun-loving, jokes, knows all different kinds of people, knows everybody that comes into his bar, and he loves sport. Now, by sport here, we don't mean football, basketball, volleyball. No. In 1400, we don't have yet sports like that. People don't go and watch sporting events back then the way we do today. Here, sport means, for your notes, competition, games where there is a winner and there's a loser, right? And so now we're ready to hear what he has to say. He's going to speak at 781. Truly, gentlemen, you're very welcome. And I can't think when, upon my word, I'm telling you no lie, I've seen a gathering here that looked so spry. Notice he says, I think this is the finest looking group of people I've ever seen. You can imagine, of course, that he probably says this all the time. In other words, he's got a scheme, he's got a plan. Let's listen to what it is, right? No, he says at line 785, not this year, as in this tavern now. I'd think you up some fun if I knew how. And as it happens, a thought has just occurred, and it will cost you nothing on my word. You're off to Canterbury. Well, Godspeed. Blessed St. Thomas, answer to your need. And I don't doubt before the journey's done, top of 117, you mean to while the time in tales and fun. In other words, it's going to take you a while to get to Canterbury, and I'm sure by the time you get there, you're going to have had a little bit of fun, right? Now, fun for the bartender might be any number of different ideas. Indeed, there's little pleasure for your bones riding along, and all as dumb as stones. In other words, if you're riding along to Canterbury and it takes you a while to get there, it's kind of boring. And he says, so I kind of feel sorry for you that you guys are going all the way to Canterbury on this kind of boring pilgrimage. Notice what he's saying without saying it. In other words, here you are, having a good time, drinking a brewski with me in my bar. It's kind of sad that you got to go for this long, boring pilgrimage, this religious trip down to Canterbury. But I have an idea. I have a plan. Watch this. So, let me then propose for your enjoyment, just as I said, a suitable employment. And if my notion suits and you agree, and promise to submit yourselves to me, playing your parts exactly as I say, tomorrow as you ride along the way, then by my father's soul, and he is dead, if you don't like it, you can have my head. In other words, he says, I got an idea, and if you don't like it, you can cut off my head. Hold up your hands and not another word. In other words, he says, I got an idea, but I want to make sure you guys are all cool with this idea. Okay, now I'm with you again. 117, line 804. Well, our consent, of course, was not deferred. It seemed not worth a serious debate. We all agreed to it at any rate and bade him issue what commands he would. Now, this is going to be the scheme of Canterbury Tales, the project, the way it is laid out, for your notes, storytelling. The storytelling. In other words, the origination of the stories of the tales, T-A-L-E-S, the tales is now here. So this will be where the idea comes from. Chaucer, genius. Again, he even himself, he can't come up with this idea, lets the host do it for him, right? My lords, he said, now listen for your good, and please don't treat my notion with disdain. This is the point. I'll make it short and plain. Each one of you shall help to make things slip by telling 2 stories on the outward trip to Canterbury. That's what I intend. And on the homeward way to Journey's End, another 2 tales from the days of old. In other words, let's put it in our notes, the rules of the game. The rules of the game are very simple. Going out to Canterbury, everyone in the group is going to tell 2 stories. We're going to Canterbury. We're going to do our pilgrimage. We're going to get there. We're going to pay our respects at the shrine of Thomas of Becket. And then we're going to come back to London. And coming back, we're going to tell 2 stories. So let's put it in our notes as math. Right? We can do the math of this if we want. We count up number of characters in the general prologue and we multiply times 2 going out, 2 coming back. That's 4. Okay? So the idea is, and this is where we get our assumed 120 stories, right? What Chaucer's got here is a rich opportunity to invent and tell a lot of stories, right? Okay? And then, he says at line 816, and then the man whose story is best told, that is to say, who gives the fullest measure of good morality and general pleasure, right? He shall be given a supper paid by all here in this tavern, in this very hall, when we come back again from Canterbury. In other words, we're going to have stories. Did you notice it? 2 elements to the story. I would write them down because that's significant. We have to have a moral tale, that is to say, a story that we will tell that has a lesson, right, of some kind, and we got to be entertained. And what's going to happen is everybody's going to vote. And the person who tells the best stories will be the person who's given a big feast when we get back here to London. And we'll do it right here in my tavern. What a great idea. And he says, when we come back again from Canterbury, line 823, and in the hope to keep you bright and merry, I'll go along with you myself and ride all at my own expense and serve as guide. So let's just write this down. We're going to have the host who injects himself into the entourage, and the host says, I'll kind of take care of everything, all right? And I'll do it at my own expense. Now, obviously, he maybe has a plan here as to maybe a way he can get a little bit out of it, too. I'll be the judge, and those who won't obey shall pay for what we spend upon the way. Now, if you all agree to what you've heard, tell me at once without another word, and I will make arrangements early for it. So, in other words, the plan is simple. The host is going to be the judge. The organizer, let's put it in our notes this way, the MC, right? The master of ceremonies. He's going to take care of everything. Okay, I'm with you on 117, line 830. Of course, We all agreed. In fact, we swore it delightedly and made entreaty too that he should act as he proposed to do. Top of page 118. Become our governor in short, and be judge of our tales in general, referee, and set the supper at a certain price. We promised to be ruled by his advice. Come high, come low, unanimously thus, we set him up in judgment over us. Now let's just pause for a moment at the end of this general prologue and point out one more genius of Chaucer. We're trying to make the argument. This is a pretty remarkably bright cat, right, who's writing this for us. One other thing we should point out. Turning the storytelling into a contest is genius, right? Is genius. Why? Because people love to watch stuff where there's a winner and a loser. They want to know who will tell the best story. So of all that group that we've just met in the general prologue, who will tell the best story that does both things, good moral tale and entertaining? Will it be the friar? Will it be the Sumner with his carbuncles? Will it be that cook? Will it be that skipper that's, captures his enemies and they say, I want to go home, and he says, great, walk the plank. You can walk right home out into the water. Who will tell the best story? And of course we want to know, and the only way to know that is to do what? Read all the stories. Genius. It's a genius setup. Okay, I'm with you on page 118. More wine was fetched, line 839. The business being done, we drank it off, and up went everyone to bed without a moment of delay. Early next morning at the spring of day, up rose our host and roused us like a cock, gathering us together in a flock, and off we rode at slightly faster pace than walking to St. Thomas's watering place. And it's as your footnote says there, this is a brook, a little river about 2 miles from the inn. Our idea of journeys today is to get, for example, in a vehicle and drive somewhere or fly somewhere. But in Chaucer's day, you got to walk somewhere, so it's a totally different project. You can't go very fast. You're riding or you're walking. You can't go very fast, and you got to stop all the time. You got to have water source, right? And of course, when you stop, what are you going to do? Somebody's going to tell a story. Okay, we haven't heard from the cook. Cook, it's your time. The host will say, it's your time. Get up, tell a little story. But before you tell your story, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us your story. And there will always be a relationship then between what the character says about himself or herself and then the story he or she tells. And there, our host drew up, began to ease his horse, and said, now listen, if you please, top of page 119. My lords, remember what you promised me. If even song and matins will agree, let's see who shall be first to tell a tale. And as I hope to drink good wine and ale, I'll be your judge. The rebel who disobeys, however much the journey costs, he pays. Now draw for cut, and then we can depart. The man who draws the shortest cut shall start. In other words, they draw straws to say who's going to go first. And now Chaucer has set us up. Let's just finish with a couple of quick observations. Chaucer's genius is two parts. Let's list both of these. One, Chaucer understands everyone loves a good story. From the time of Homer through the time of Plato's dialogues up to now Chaucer, everyone loves a good story. So Chaucer's tuned into that. Number two, Chaucer is aware that he wants to present important and controversial ideas, but he is going to do it through the guise of storytelling. In other words, dude, I'm just telling a story. Do you know people like this? They can say something mean, and then when the person gets offended, they go, dude, I'm just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. What are you so upset about? Just joking, just joking. Chaucer is genius in this regard. He is going to say some things as an iconoclast that's definitely going to offend, but then he's going to be able to say, just kidding, just kidding. Or, even better, it wasn't me who said it, it was the Sumner. Don't get mad at me. I'm just telling you, remember, I'm just writing down what he said. The genius of Chaucer, then, is in this two-part approach, where he can tell a good story, and at the same time, educate, what we will call a propedeutic. Propedeutic, that is to say, didactic. He's teaching something, and this form of storytelling that Chaucer will employ will have a legacy. Let's write it in our notes really quickly. From Chaucer, we then will find Shakespeare, who is the genius storyteller of them all. Two households, both alike in dignity in fair Verona, where we take our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, the opening lines of Romeo and Juliet will in some ways play the very game that Chaucer will play in the general prologue. And of course, from Shakespeare then, if you want to stay in the British tradition, we've already mentioned him in our sidebar, Charles Dickens, the greatest novelist of them all. That capacity to tell a good story and at the same time make a point. And of course then, into the 20th century with the great James Joyce, as we will finish our conversations in senior English together. When we see James Joyce and his classic novel Ulysses, we'll see he is still playing Chaucer's game of really good characters, telling really good stories that not only entertain, but also somehow educate. They somehow say something profoundly important. Thank you. Let's turn now to the Partners Prologue.